How do you think India is shaping the Web3 ecosystem, and where do we stand globally? And the second part to that question is, how do our regulatory and enforcement frameworks compare in terms of mitigating risks of exposing consumers to a nascent technology and market while fostering a favorable environment for Web3 projects in India to thrive?
Thanks for that question. Hi, everyone. It's great to see such a full house for this rather dry topic, and I hope that we'll make it quite engaging for you. Specifically to Ishwari's question, right? We, as a country, we have a lot of clarity now as compared to where we were 4 years ago. I think the watershed moment for us from a regulatory perspective, legal perspective for the Web3 ecosystem started from the Supreme Court ruling in 2020, right? Like making cryptocurrencies legal for people to even hold. And a lot of innovation has been fostered by the fact that that moment even happened. And now we are actually in so much a better place than we were even a couple of years ago. We have clarity around how these assets should be taxed. We have clarity around what specific businesses will need to seek a license with the relevant regulator, which is the FIU in India. And all of that is a move in the right direction to giving clarity to the ecosystem and addressing some of the specific top-of-mind priorities for the regulator, specifically like money laundering and all of that stuff. So I think we've made good strides, but I think it's just the beginning, and there's so much more for us to do, and so much further that we have to go. And I think a lot more clarity can also come in and help innovators who are building from here, because we have a huge developer base. We had just 3% of the global developer base out of India in 2018, and that number is now 12%. And it's the leader. India is the leader in terms of contributing developers among the emerging markets. So I think we owe it to them to kind of push for more clarity in this space.
Your perspective on this?
Yeah, hi. What we also need to understand when we are looking at what India is doing or what Indian regulators are doing and what's happening globally is that we are not too far off. It may seem that our regulator has not done much, but we have definitely moved on from the time of, hey, I don't know what this is, let's just stop everything, to where we are today, where there is a tax regime. We may not like that, but it's still lower than what Japan has, which is 55%, right? And there is that credibility which comes with being a reporting entity under the PMLA to FIU. So there are strides which have happened. And for comparison, if you look at US as well, there is no standard regulation there. There are multiple litigations going on there as well. If we just compare those things and not to think only in terms of, let's say that there is Avara or there is MICA, etc., we have definitely done good work here in India, and with the kind of community that we have, I'm fairly hopeful.
Can you add some thinking of the regulator?
Okay, so I'm going to be a contrarian here, and actually, for all of you in the room, if you do 3 things, right? The government will love you, the regulator will love you. The first is that you ensure compliance to AML, CFT regulations, and even if you are a chain that is doing something with tokens online, you have to register. Even if you are dealing with exchanges in India and you're holding custody, so there are 4 types of entities that have to register with FIU. If you're one of those entities, just register, right? And second, part of the first answer is you got to make sure that you comply, okay? And let me tell you this, in the latest FATF report, the Indian regulator has been cited as amongst the best in the world. The second thing that you got to do is there is a tax regime, right? If you comply with the tax regime and you do the 1% TDS and you deposit it, right, there'll be no other challenge. The third issue from the regulator's point of view, from the government's point of view, is if there is something, right, okay, which happens. How do you ensure that your customer or your user is protected? If you can demonstrate these three things in your organization, you will be supported by the regulator. It's very simple, right? There is no rocket science here that you need to do.
I think that added some perspective into what the regulations were, from not having anything to having some sort of a framework. But then again, as these regulations are formed, the folks that bear the brunt of these regulations essentially are businesses, right? Like the quick changes in regulations also have an impact on the businesses in terms of costs and their ability to innovate, right? As lawyers for these businesses, what are the biggest hurdles that you face while onboarding Web3 consumers in India?
Yeah, start on this one. So, see, we need to understand that, at least in my career, this is the first place where we are actually asking the regulator to regulate us, right? Everywhere else, we actually go and tell the regulator to keep a lighter hand. Here, we are asking for the regulation. Keeping that in mind, at a minimum, we need access to things like, easy access to banking. That is one of the biggest challenges, right? We need a framework around how this whole registration that Dilip sir spoke about can happen faster. As things stand today, while there is a methodology, there is no set process, there are no set timelines. So you can always apply for the registration, but there is no guarantee that whether you'll get it in 1 month or whether it will even come in 6 months. So that's one of the big challenges where you're being asked to register, but at the same time, there's no standard timeline within which that registration can come through. Third, basic things like UPI access to India Stack, everybody is building and we are being deprived. Right? So these basic things need to be put in place from the regulators. And while it is easy to talk about the fact that we should have the consumer's interest in mind, and all players who are building here always have that. But at the same time, that also has to be regulator-led. There has to be some minimum standards which have to be set around those frameworks to which we can all adhere. So I think on one hand, while there is a lot of pressure on the ecosystem to try and act as if we are regulator, and try and fulfill the duties that any other regulated or reporting entity is doing, the support that should be coming in from the regulator is definitely lacking, and that creates a lot of hurdles from the banking perspective, from even building trust with the consumers. So that's the challenge that we face as lawyers.
I don't have too much to add. I think Om has covered a lot of it, but I think a more sort of coherent, concise framework. Currently, it's quite fragmented. It's spread across different areas, from tax to AML. Would love to see some guidance in the space of consumer protection, because I think that's a huge area in which we need to invest. And yeah, I think it's the practical challenges Om has already talked about. But yeah, I think we could definitely provide more guidance to businesses, while also recognizing that the cost of compliance, especially for startups, small Web3 projects, that is also something that could be potentially prohibitive. So just kind of keeping that balance in mind, because today we have very thriving ecosystem, but for us to kind of move forward and have more developers build out of India, not kind of innovate from more crypto-friendly jurisdictions, I think that will be critical.
Understood. And I think I'd like to give my perspective as well. Working with an exchange as well as an on-ramping and an off-ramping solution, it's not just about regulations, right? You can have a set of rules, but if the enforcers are not informed as to how to enforce these regulations, or how do you make decisions on the go, it becomes very difficult to make sense of these laws. So while regulations, especially in the areas of scams and frauds are necessary, I think at a very local level, it's important to make sure all the enforcers of these laws are not just informed, but equipped with enough technical information to make informed decisions on solving these problems on ground. Because laws are going to take a lot of time to catch up, and the crypto world moves extremely fast. So I think equipping people with the ability to make informed decisions in line with the principle of law will definitely add value and create an ecosystem that fosters more businesses to thrive.
So just how many developers in the room? Okay. You know what is the biggest challenge of governments in developing and emerging economies? They don't know across the different applications in the Web3 space how much of foreign exchange or other things is going out. If someone can build a Web3 application that enables you, it's a cross-chain application, it's not rocket science, that enables the regulator to actually understand and control the amount of on-ramping and off-ramping that could be done in an ecosystem, it'll be your biggest contribution to the world, especially the emerging economies and the developing economies. That is the number one challenge that the regulators are actually facing. Just think about it. I'm sure there will be someone who will come up and the world is yours.
Sounds like we need OX people for businesses. I don't know how many of you guys were in the consumer crypto session yesterday, but
I think that's a good suggestion, but may not sit well with a lot of folks that are hardcore decentralized and crypto folks.
It's a decentralized app. It's actually a decentralized app. There's nothing. No one will have the data. Okay? It'll only ping if you exceed a limit. That's it. See, this is a big challenge which we in this industry need to understand. There are certain concerns of the regulator, AML, CTF, exceeding limitations. If we can help them to solve the problem, then they will not put any fetters on us. It's just like the fintech industry. Fintech also is there, and there are a lot of incubators in India. There is one in Haryana. There's one in Tamil Nadu is setting up one. Andhra will be setting up one. There's one in Telangana. You guys can actually do your development there and be, shielded as far as as far as your regulatory exposure goes. Even RBI has a regulatory sandbox. The International Financial Center in Ahmedabad also has a sandbox.
Right. I think now that we've generally spoken of what the ecosystem was to what it's becoming, to as an Indian business, what are the hurdles that you generally face? I think we also have to discuss as to the exact steps, immediate steps a regulator can take. And right now the perspective and the question to this panel is not from a business point of view, but from a consumer protection standpoint. Generally, what do you think on an immediate basis the regulators need to consider in order to establish a framework that can achieve the aim of consumer protection?
Okay, so if you go to the financial sector and you've invested money in a fixed deposit or recurring deposit or got money in the bank, right? What is the protection that you have? 5 lakhs, right? And there's a guarantee fund set up by RBI, all banks contribute to it. If everybody in this space says, yeah, I have this, and I'm going to ensure that if on my system, if anything happens, whether it is a hack, whether it is a loss, or whether it is something, you're guaranteed of your 5 lakhs, then the regulator can't say anything else to you because that's the law that is governing him, right? Do you have, companies are supposed to put money equivalent to the shares that they issue in a share capital reserve. Are we doing it? So there is a lot of things we could take from the real world and apply it here. And then we can actually take on the regulator that, we're doing it, what more that do you want us to do? So I think, these are the things that we need to look at. And we need to contribute to the development of the regulation. I know that Hashed is doing a regulatory paper. At BWA, we've done a regulatory paper. What we've also done is we've brought out token listing guidelines, consumer protection guidelines, fair trade guidelines, cybersecurity guidelines. There are 8, 9 guidelines that we've brought out. Now, you can, if you apply those to yourself, except in consumer, you have to build in consumer 2.0, you are mostly covered as far as the regulator is concerned.
Understood. Anita?
Yeah, I think a couple of areas in consumer protection we need to look at. One is obviously the fact that this is a very nascent technology, and it doesn't have, by design, it doesn't have a lot of protection for the Indian consumer, I would like to say, clarify, built in, or for consumers from emerging markets who are not traditionally, comfortable with even with smartphones or with apps, are still just getting used to that, and they're not like digitally native in some sense. And this is already like 3 leaps ahead of that. I think there's a lot that the regulator can, not just the regulator, I don't want to put the burden on the regulator entirely, but the industry can sort of come together and self-regulate and put in place guidelines that can, help on 2 fronts, I think. The one is, of course, the user centricity in design, but also in terms of, what happens if, something goes wrong, there's a hack, there's a breach, and how do we kind of deal with those situations? So I think that's one aspect. I think another aspect is data protection. I think a lot of Indian consumers have been kind of habituated to giving up their data. And I think the fact that, blockchain is as transparent as it is, there needs to be more education and awareness about that. And a lot of businesses also need to be more cognizant of that from the time that they're building out their product. And finally, I would say privacy. I think it goes hand in hand with data protection. A lot of blockchain-based consumer-facing apps can be sort of privacy protecting by design. Of course, we have the laws and everything in place, but I think it's more about thinking about these considerations at the time that you're thinking about your product, because I think Web3 is a unique space in the sense that these legal considerations, these regulatory considerations, they need to be a part of your ideation process. And I think getting lawyers and getting experts involved at that stage can be a make or break decision for you if you're starting out in this space. I think
that's a very valid point. I think bringing in your advisors at an early stage to just at least get some advice on how do you build a product, especially building a product for retail consumers. You may choose to not go by their advice initially, but there's no harm in always asking for it at these early stages. Using that as a segue, I
just wanted to close out. While we should all hire more lawyers, right? Everybody wants to do that. But there's a lot of, from a consumer protection standpoint, as Dilip sir was saying, there's a lot of exciting projects that we are working on within BWA, within their legal subcommittee, compliance subcommittee, and security subcommittees, bringing out guidelines, minimum standards. So if you're developing something, if you're making something, you should definitely look at A, becoming part of the BWA if possible, and B, accessing their website and finding out these minimum standards that would help you. But we also need to understand that when we keep saying all the time that what is it that you as an ecosystem are doing to build consumer trust, in India, during the COVID times when RBI announced the interest holiday, banks which are 40, 50, 60 years old didn't want to pass it on to the consumers, right? And RBI literally had to force them to pass on the interest holiday in a fair manner to the consumers. That's the ecosystem which already exists with the entrenched players. So to expect that as a nascent industry, we will be able to do something which meets or surpasses that without there being a generous amount of regulatory handholding is fairly unfair to the industry itself. I can understand that the path is that maybe we establish a SRO through the BWA, right, and then go on to become a regulated space. But the expectations from us are fairly unfair as things stands right now.
Understood. And using that as a segue into the next topic of discussion is that of an SRO. What do you think, given our current ecosystem, the SRO can bring to the table in a way that where you can act as a speaker between the industry and the regulator, and even if for some reason you can also speak on behalf of the consumers. So what do you think that ecosystem will look like if an SRO is in place? And do you think it's the right time for an SRO to be set up?
There's never a wrong time for an SRO. Actually, I hope Dilip sir agrees with that. And so I started my career in broadcasting. I was with Star TV. And we found that both the News Broadcasters Association and the General Broadcasters Association, which was there, the SROs that were set up there with retired Chief Justices of India as their chairpersons, really helped set standards and really helped the industry to manage the controversies which would come along, right? And set up certain standards which were then adhered by all. I believe for crypto at least, right now is the correct time for the SRO. And while Dilip sir can elaborate more on that, we are on that path with the various guidelines that have now been brought out by the BWA.
Just before I hand it over to Dilip sir to take it away. So at KGen, we have a tradition and we have a long-standing experience with engaging with policy, with regulators through an SRO. We have a background in gaming for many, many years at the founder level. And we've advocated for the gaming industry to bring in amendments to online gaming, specifically to the IT Act in terms of online gaming, and to advocate on the tax front as well. So we have that experience, and we're definitely looking to replicate that in the Web3 space as well. And I know that Bharat BWA is already doing a phenomenal job on that front. So I think it really is the right time for industry to come together, because we're at a historic point globally as well in terms of how the regulatory landscape could play out with the election in the US and how that has played out. The appointment of the new chairman of the SEC just today. And everything is looking up in terms of how globally regulation, and this is a cross-border industry by design, so we will all have to kind of collaborate even at a global level, and I think that the industry should come together at this point.
I think just before you answer that question, just one more part to that question. How do you think that the SRO will work or operate as a body that represents the interest of the industry and not become a battleground of lobbying and perhaps influence? Like, how do you think we can draw that balance in an organization of an SRO?
So there are two global models of SRO. One is a Japanese model, other is Taiwanese, and both have been drafted by the same Japanese person, right? What we are trying at BW is to take all the different elements of that and create that framework in India. If the regulator wants, they can take all those things and create the regulation, right? And again, if you go back to the 3 points that I made, consumer protection, money laundering, and counterterrorism financing, and dollarization. If the SRO is able to address these 3 issues, then the regulator has got no other aspect to do. But the biggest challenge to SRO or not SRO is, the regulator does not know of any use cases, scalable use cases in this space that justify regulating the space. So in Chris Dixon's books, there's the computer and the casino. So they only see the casino part, and we are unable to convince them about the consumer part. So if all of you have got use cases that you're doing, right? You said UPI. When you're talking to UPI integration, those guys said, if you can do 9.5 billion transactions a month, you talk to us. If you can't do it, then don't talk to us. So please talk and shout from the rooftop about use cases that you develop, not in the banking sector, not in the sector that you tread on the toes of the regulator, but other use cases. I can guarantee you that there will be regulation coming soon.
Understood. I think luckily we have a couple of minutes left. Happy to open up the floor to a few questions. I can see your hand go up right there.
Very tentative hand going up.
It's like half.
Abhishek, what is this tentative hand going up? Lung power. If you can't use mic power.
Oh, hello, sir and ma'am. My name is Yash, and I am a crypto tax consultant. So I have a very simple question. As sir said that 1% TDS compliance, it's actually easy to convince clients to comply with taxation and 1% TDS. But many clients are reluctant to follow the regulation because of few reasons. For an example, there is Coinswitch, CoinDCX, many crypto apps which follow the 1% TDS rule, but Binance does not follow the same 1% TDS rule. And many international friends have been saying that Indian government efforts on the WazirX hack case, the efforts from Indian regulators is very slow on that part.
You know, I want to answer the second question first. Very simple. Singapore entity, legal process happening in Singapore, the resolution plan will be drawn. The same thing would happen. This is what happened in Mount Gov. Yeah, it took some time. The Bitfinex case was a different case where they looked at, they were also benefited by the rise in the Bitcoin price, so they could actually do that. Conditions very similar, so that's a separate issue. But I think the 1% TDS and the 30% taxation, I don't know if you're aware now, there's a global agreement coming up, India has not signed it, about declaring the holding of crypto assets. You are mandatorily required to declare holding of crypto assets in your income tax form in a separate enclosure. And you know, it's very easy to track whether you have crypto assets or not, STRs, etc. So it's better to comply with the law and pay the tax, right? Rather than take the risk of being penalized later. And you might see some movement very quickly where everybody who's in the space will be treated the same way, whether you're onshore or offshore.
Yes, sir. Actually, many of my clients are waiting that Binance also start following the same regulation as CoinDCX and Coinswitch in India.
Yeah, they should. I think they get registering under FIU. They've registered in the FIU, and if they're not following the regulation, they'll be penalized. Actually, they paid a 2.2 million fine because they had onboarded customers when they were there. I don't know if I got the figure right, but that's the thing.
Understood. Any other questions? I can see a hand go up right behind.
Hi. First of all, wonderful panel. Thank you, everyone. I just had a small question. Like, I'm a legal advisor in the industry. So I often get questions from the clients regarding the frozen bank accounts. So essentially, as you said, the transactions in the crypto industry can be tracked. But what happens is that when a person is trying to do a trade, a P2P trade on an exchange like Binance, the money that they receive is often tainted, which they are not aware of. Ultimately, their bank accounts get frozen, and the investigating agencies take up 6 months, 9 months because of the 20K, 10K amount that is lying in their bank accounts, and they can't really hire legal help because it's such a small amount, but ultimately their bank account is frozen. So
we're working on it. He's just actually stepped out. Vikram is just moved out, right? I got a phone call, but they have done something. You have Raja here from Zeppe, and you have at the booths of Edul's company, Mudrex. He's here. Mudrex is here. If anybody who's dealing with this, we are taking it up. We actually started, in a closed door event somewhere. We have agreed to actually educate people in this thing how to deal with it, and it's a major agenda point of BW and everybody collectively. Right? I also, the other co-founder of Geotis is also sitting in the room. Here.
Next P2P issues, we are going to talk in the next panel.
Okay.
thank you, sir.
So you need to understand, even if you remove crypto from this equation, right, if there's a bank account which is used as a conduit for any kind of, regardless of whether it is crypto, the first thing that the police does is freeze that bank account. So it's not something that is uniquely happening to us. The police does not have any other way of actually combating this. They don't know which funds are legal and which are not legal, right? So it's not like they are penalizing only crypto, but as Sir said, there's a lot of work happening on that.
First advice is ensure your KYC is robust. If your KYC is robust and you know the source of funds, less chance of that happening, and your clients need to be on the ball there.
Understood. I think last question.
Yeah.
since we have
myself is Dinesh.
run out of time. Yes, please.
I have two questions.
Two questions and we'll answer.
Okay.
Yeah. First question is like, how do you integrate tokenization with the current legal framework? And the second question is, what is the data privacy law can deal with the Web3 companies?
Second question.
Hi, good afternoon. So I'm the founder of a family office based out of New Delhi. I have a question for you. Are we working on this TDS tax that we are discussing, 1%? It kind of eats up people's capital.
So yeah, to actually, I'll take your question first, and then the experts will take the other question.
Yeah.
We have, for the last 3 years, we've been representing on this. Unfortunately, there was an interim budget which they could not signal out crypto. We've actually given the calculation. You invest 100, 1% goes on, next thing you have 99. We've taken them through that.
Yeah.
We've taken them through the data showing that you actually refund more tax than you collect.
Yeah.
And we are working on it. Hopefully you'll see something, but if family offices also take this up in their informal chats with the political ecosystem, then you'll see this happen.
Yeah. Okay.
So-
Thank you.
I just want to
Tokenization
know-
question.
Family offices can also become members of BWA.
So how tokenization
Okay,
fits with
sure.
the current legal
I'll meet you.
framework?
Sure. Yeah, this is a question that actually regulators all over the world are grappling with. Not just regulators, all kinds of experts, legal experts, accounting experts are trying to figure out how to account for token, right? In India, you have basically two spaces in which it is specifically regulated. The tax regime, we talked about it, which has separate sort of sections that talk about how virtual digital assets will be taxed. So that's what you can look at. And separately, the PMLA, which is the Prevention of Money Laundering Act, which recently there's been a notification last year, which brings specific businesses that involve exchange of virtual digital assets, custodying virtual digital assets, and all of that under the ambit of PMLA, and such entities will have to kind of register with the Financial Intelligence Unit and comply with the periodic reporting obligations. So that is currently how this is, addressed in the Indian legal framework. But there's sort of global, discourse on, what is a digital asset? Is it an asset? Is it a commodity? Is it a good? Is it software? So this is a sort of like an ongoing, discussion, and you can keep tabs on it as we are. Yeah. I think he had a question on data protection. I don't know if one of you want to take it.
Yes. So like how data protection law gonna fit the Web3 companies? Like, what do you guys think?
Okay, so you have two challenges, and that's the biggest challenge here. The belief is that if all the data is on the blockchain and it's available to everybody there, then it's a violation of the data protection law. But if you use zero knowledge systems, you can actually overcome that and enable that to happen. On the real world asset tokenization issue, there's a very interesting case happening in Telangana, which is real world asset tokenizer for real estate. And there are challenges involved there. Do we allow for fractionalization of stamp duty? Do we allow something? But the consensus coming around is if you can identify what asset you are tokenizing, then the rules governing that particular sector will be, there's a view, will be governing you, not some other aspect here. Because what is a DMAT? DMAT is also tokenization of a share certificate. We tend to look at it physical share, right? So there is existing, and that's where these lawyers and all come in handy. So you need to look at it very, very carefully, but just make sure that you're on the right side of the law.
Understood. Okay, one last question.
Hello. Afternoon. Good that we have a good discussion. I have two questions. One, of course, as the taxation part, it's clear, but by and large, the rural or the unknown clients or the customers of crypto investors, they are still in the fear that because the government has not explicitly said it's legal, but rather putting tax, it becomes legal. So when do you expect government to clear this particular thing? I know that it's not that easy. This is one question. Question one. Question two, what is the status on the consultative paper, what is supposed to come? Thank you.
You know, income tax law is very clear. if you're doing smuggling and you're caught by the police and they capture some money of yours, you can actually take it as a set-off, although the action is illegal. Income tax is charged on any income, legal or illegal. So let's forget that. And there's a good paper by Nishit Desai and the lawyers, why Bitcoin is legal in India. Just read that. The second thing about the discussion paper, we hope that will come out soon. And my understanding of the situation is as follows, that under the IMF FSP process, India has agreed to certain deadlines to issue certain regulatory processes. The deadline is on December 31st, 2024, the first deadline. In the current thing, India was said that we're not really complied with, but let's see. But at least that IMF FSB paper is an agreement, and if we want to be part of the FSB and the IMF, we have to comply with that. So whether we see we hope that the discussion paper will come out, but discussion paper doesn't mean regulation.
Okay, folks, we have run out of time, but I'm sure all of you have more questions. Feel free to reach out to any of these speakers once they descend the dais. But thank you again. Thank you for your time and patience. I hope this discussion contributed some value addition to you running a business, or at least thinking of starting a Web3 business in India. So thanks.
So Yash from BW is also here. He just put his hand up. So he can do that because I think Vishal has asked me to disappear somewhere immediately.